You're very welcome to the final Teaching Toolkit Thursday of the academic year. We are delighted that this session has been completely imagined and created by our student as partners this year. So I'm very excited to welcome Kayla and Staffen to the floor. We're going to turn things over to them for their presentation on cultivating belonging in the classroom. Over to you, Kayla.
Thank you, Lee. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Kayla Graham. I'm joined by Staffen Thomas Shabu. And as Lee mentioned, we are both students as partners with the UCD Teaching and Learning. And we work really closely with Lee and David on supporting these Teaching Toolkit Thursdays. And we're very excited to be speaking with you all today, leading this session to talk about cultivating belonging in the classroom. Great. So a little kind of highlight for our agenda this afternoon. If you've been to one of these before, you know we'll kind of spend 15 minutes or so on a presentation with our slide deck, and then we'll have a good amount of time at the end for kind of open conversation, discussion, and question and answer. So to start, we thought it would be great to talk about what is belonging. When we were doing some initial kind of thinking around this topic. Of course, we're doing some initial Googling, and we found this really good quote from Greg Cohen from his book, Belonging, The Science of Creating Connection and Bridging Divides. The citation is there at the bottom if you're interested in learning more about his work. But we found that his quote here was cited by a lot of researchers and organizations that do some studying and thinking around belonging. And he defines that as a feeling that we're part of a larger group, and specifically one that values, respects, and cares for us, and the extent or the degree to which we feel we have something to contribute to that group. So we thought this was really interesting because I think if you were to ask someone initially, what is belonging? I think you'd have a lot of trouble defining it. I think if you were to ask me initially what belonging, how I would define it, I might have a little trouble. But what I liked about this quote is that it really emphasizes that it is kind of an amorphous idea. It's the feeling that you have when you're with a bigger group, and the sensation you have that you are a valued and important member of that group. And it's something that is kind of, it can change over time and is really just about the way you might feel in a given moment or in a given scenario. And I think before we dive too much into belonging in the classroom, it's also really important to talk about one of the big events that really impacted belonging, along with a lot of other elements of our lives, the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's wild to think about it, but 5 years ago to the month, we were first kind of hit with the COVID-19 pandemic and the huge changes that it introduced to our world, and particularly in this context, the world of learning, teaching, and education. And we were kind of very quickly tasked with changing the ways that we are used to learning. And we're going from in-person settings to online settings, or may have had pauses in education, more starts and stops, all of which contributed to kind of an increased feeling of isolation, particularly at the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic, but that has kind of lingered into the aftermath of it that we are living in now. And really interestingly, which you'll find if you follow some of the links below to the research we were doing about this topic, some research into this has identified that for students, at least, the sense of belonging that they felt before the COVID-19 pandemic has not really returned in the aftermath of it. So those feelings of isolation that kind of peaked in COVID-19 when people were working and learning from home has kind of continued on, even though we've returned by and large to a more traditional kind of in-person classroom setting. And we also wanted to flag here, although we'll talk about it a little later as well, that when we talk about belonging, it's really important to consider the ways that our social identities play a role in the ways that we do or do not feel connected to the communities that we're a part of. Belonging is really critically shaped by identities like race and gender and how they may or may not be addressed in your broader academic context or in the individual classroom setting. In relation to isolation, then that could be an additional factor. If we know that the sense of belonging kind of has still not returned to pre-pandemic levels, then you have kind of this baseline of isolation potentially that can be compounded upon by other things that are going on in your students' lives. So these are kind of just things that I think as instructors and also as students, it's important to be aware of the ways that the things that are happening outside of the classroom in relation to belonging are going to have an impact into the ways that belonging is showing up in the classroom, and then what are some things that can be done in that educational context to understand those factors and to work with them to help cultivate belonging. So kind of continuing a little bit with that theme of COVID-19, you have to think about belonging online. We are in an online webinar right now. A lot of education has returned to in-person settings, but I, for example, still have classes that are exclusively or primarily online if there's a hybrid element. And there's some really interesting research and thinking being done around what belonging even looks like in a digital space, and if that's something that can be cultivated. Um, and it's kind of, again, because belonging is amorphous, I think there's still a lot of interesting work to be done on this. We found some people who felt that belonging is really difficult to cultivate in an online space, but we also found some really interesting tips at the link here and that we've pulled out onto the slide that highlights some ways that you can work in an online setting to cultivate belonging. So one of kind of our bullet points here is about the importance of creating structure and being proactive when you're trying to cultivate belonging online. Those can look like sometimes really like basic things, like a welcome email that might not seem as impactful when you do it. But as a student, especially if I'm know that I'm going into an online setting where I may never meet people in person, sometimes having a little personal touch at the start of, a semester or a term of learning with just information about you as an instructor or what we're going to be learning, welcoming you to the educational setting and how excited we are to learn together can make a big difference into making you feel like I'm not just taking this class, but I'm a part of this class. And then also kind of having opportunities for people to learn together. One of the examples that we found in our own experience and online was the value of kind of peer-to-peer assignment opportunities. So in particular, again, if you're working in an online setting where people may or may not meet in person, having opportunities for students to work together on assessments or in discussions can, again, make a big difference in making sure that people feel connected to the educational setting. And that also relates to the next point here about kind of introducing more creative thinking, things like interactive discussion boards or online cafes, where maybe that can be built into like your online learning apparatus, where students can just go in and ask each other questions, where they're encouraged to respond to each other's discussion posts. I think sometimes in practice there can be hot or cold feelings about discussion posts if you have to respond to a certain number of other students' posts about them. But sometimes, again, having a more open setting like that online cafe version where you can just respond more casually to what other students are thinking, again, can sometimes make a really big difference in making people feel like they know the people they're learning with. All right, and then our next couple of slides here are focused a little bit more on the traditional classroom setting. So I wanted to start with talking about belonging in the classroom before class starts. So I think one of the overarching themes with a lot of our slides is going to be communication. Communication is always key. And just having that initial like interaction with you as an instructor, knowing that you are available for questions, making it sometimes explicit that I, as a student, am not like bothering you, that you're open to questions, that you're excited to be a part of the educational process. Sometimes that can just take a little bit of the pressure off and make it a little easier for students to reach out to you. Again, kind of related to the importance of considering identity in the classroom. We can't overstate the value of like learning students' names and the appropriate pronunciation. I have been in some classroom settings before or some organizations where they will allow you to kind of put the pronunciation guide beside your name. So if prompting students to provide that sometimes can be really valuable. I've always found my name is Kayla, but it's spelled differently than people might always see. So sometimes people do say it wrong. I generally don't mind correcting people or offering a couple of chances to correct it. But sometimes use an instructor saying like, hey, could everyone just like maybe write in the way that your name is pronounced or the name that you prefer to go by at the start of a class session can kind of take the pressure off of everyone. And again, it gives you a little bit more insight into those students and what they need and creates a more personable kind of connection. Additionally, providing clear information about support services and resources. Yes, sometimes this is information that students can find from the university or from other like websites and things online. But having it in a centralized place coming from you as the instructor can kind of really reduce that burden for students who might really need it and who otherwise might struggle to find those resources if they aren't used to navigating an academic institution and maybe they really don't know where to search. Making it clear kind of where the support services are can make them feel like it's less of a burden on them again to be a part of active learning in the classroom in the way that works best for them. And again, the last kind of point here is about creating like a welcoming classroom environment. So that can be the physical space. You may not have a lot of control over what your classroom looks like if you're like assigned it randomly at the start of the term. But if you have the potential to move around tables in a way that helps facilitate discussion, keeping windows open, letting in some fresh air, like nice sunlight, kind of keeping the space like a little bit more warm and welcoming to the best of your ability can again be a part of kind of taking some of the pressure off, making it feel like a welcoming environment. But there's also worth noting that some of that welcoming classroom environment are the intangible things. It's your body language, it's the energy that you're bringing to the classroom, it's coming in excited and ready to teach, and hopefully like bringing that energy can help make it easier for students to come in and feel excited and welcome and ready to learn. So with that, I will turn it over to Staffin to talk about our next few slides.
Yeah. Hi, Killa. So thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for that. So now let's get into the belonging to the classroom, like during the class. So, it's very important that we have diversity. We have to acknowledge the diversity among the classroom, and there are sort of different people. Like you should acknowledge, like there are people like the neurodivergent people, those who are very introvert. There's of people of different needs. So it's very important that we celebrate diversity around the classroom. So yeah, so we need to acknowledge that, and we should be open to questions and discussion and offer opportunities for a collaborative learning experience. And when it comes to collaborative learning experience, it depends upon the modules. So if there are certain subjects or modules have like a practical exposure is very required, so we can't go much on the theoretical approach. So it's really necessary that the faculties or the module coordinators can take initiatives to bring collaborative learning experience to such modules. So that's coming to the during the classroom, and going to next slide. Yeah, so during the after the class, so we have discussed like what we can do before and during the class to cultivate a belongingness. But what about the after the class is over? So it is really important to remember that fostering belongingness is an ongoing process. So we need to know it is an iterative process to ensure that everyone is felt belong in the classroom. So one really valuable practice to do is solicit feedback from your students. So this shows that you value their opinions and are committed to continuous improvement. So you could use like surveys, informal discussions, or any sort of feedback mechanism, on specific aspects of the course. So when the students see that their feedback is taken seriously, they feel more connected and valued in the learning community. Another thing is the professional development and continuing educations. That also plays a significant role. So by staying up to date on best practices in inclusive teaching and strategies for fostering belongingness, you can definitely refine your approach and create a more supportive learning environment. And finally, it's important to support institutional initiatives around belongingness. So obviously, UCD is increasingly focused on creating a culture of belongings across the entire institution. So in the upcoming slide, we'll be talking about that. Yeah, so now let's shift our focus a bit and consider belonging outside the classroom. So it's crucial to remember that students' sense of belongingness isn't solely limited to their experience in the classroom, but it also depends on outside the classroom. So the broader academic environment, so that can have a huge impact on whether or not a student feels like they truly belong in the university. So this includes everything from the overall campus climate to the support services that are available in the university. So what UCD is doing to support belongingness as an institution. So it's clearly in their radar. So UCD has a clear position and resource dedicated to fostering belongingness. So uh, this is reflected in their UCD strategy for 2030, which emphasizes well-being and a community. So it's about working together to support a sense of belongingness. So uh, to ensure that belongingness is implemented, it's not just a responsibility of an individual. It's not just like the faculties can take initiative. It's like a student, staff, and everyone should collectively come together to ensure that everyone's feel belong in the university. So, and finally, consider this, like how can you as an instructor support this broader work? So this think about how your actions in the classroom or teaching methodologies can contribute to the university's overall goals for creating a welcoming and inclusive environment. Yeah, moving on to the next slide. So now we like to shift to a more personal perspective and share some insight on what's worked for us and what haven't. So first thing, what has worked for us is like one key element has been fostering collective ownership of the classroom experience. So this means that moving away a bit away from the traditional top-down approach and empowering students to have opinion in shaping their learning environment. And another important factor, which I can relate personally also, which has been very effective, is like being able to provide open and honest feedback to instructors. So creating a culture of constructive criticism where students feel that they're comfortable sharing their thoughts and suggestions can lead to significant improvements in teaching practices and overall classroom environment. And crucially, it's about building trust and rapport between instructor and students. So this involves like being approachable, demonstrating empathy, and showing genuine interest in like students' well-being and success. On the flip side, we have also identified that things that haven't worked very well for us. One thing is unclear expectations. So, such unclear expectations can sometimes create a bit confusion, anxiety among students, and making the student less confident about their learning environment. And another thing is like not having enough opportunity for input or interaction, and that can leave students feeling disengaged and disconnected, hindering their sense of belongingness. So that's why I'm going to the next slide. Yeah, now let's look into the link between belongingness and learning outcomes. So it's not just about feeling good in the classroom, but it's more about the academic success also. So as the slide highlights, there are better learning and outcomes and retention when students feel a sense of belongingness. So research clearly demonstrate that students who feel that they belong at their institution get better grades and fare better on persistence, engagement, and mental health. So it's very obvious, like the environment where we are matters. So whether it's work or academics, when the environment is right and you feel belong, you can deliver at your best. So that's about that. And essentially, students achieve more and feel more satisfied with the learning experience when they feel that they belong in the university. And moving ahead, to build on a connection between belongings and learning, let's explore some practical tips on this. So one simple yet effective technique is to incorporate warm, personal, less formal language and appropriate. So when maintaining professionalism is also important, using more approachable tone can make a big difference. So many students are a bit scared, especially in a new yet challenging and academic environment, and seeing you as a real person can definitely take some of the edge off and encourage them to be like bring their real selves to the classroom. So this can create more relaxed and welcoming atmosphere. And also remember the importance of empathy, care, and shared ownership in the classroom. So these elements work together to foster a sense of community and mutual respect. And sure, finally consider belonging in your instruction materials. Think about how you can design your curriculum, activities, and assessment to promote inclusion and a sense of belongings to all the students. And moving ahead. Yeah, so there's a new addition to the teaching toolkit. So this is a resource you can refer to. The slide deck and link will be shared. Yeah. Yeah, so there's another resource you can check out. So this is a seminar building for university success. And this is by Professor Noah Finkelstein and Phoebe Young on 26 March at Queen Lecture Theatre. So you can check around this also. Yeah. And yeah, thank you. And we are open for discussion and Q&A. So feel free to ask us.
Thank you, Kayla and Stefan.